2 Growing up. 49. Why do you want to do the BA? I was admitted to St. Xavier's Junior College, Bombay, one of the most prestigious colleges in India, to do my higher secondary certificate, which is a 2-year pre-university program. It can be compared to the levels in England, though certainly not on par. It was the Phi RST time that I was going to come in contact with a mass of normal students. Would I be accepted socially? Would I be able to cope academically? Initially, there was some trouble as people did not have the experience or education about people with disability. Why do these students want to give this exam? Was the response of the Vice-Chancellor of Bombay University to a request by Mother and Pam that the university make available the option of extra time for disabled students sitting in an exam. These exams are a waste of time. They are useless and these students would be better kept at home, she said. Mother had by then managed to create much needed awareness about my condition. When she began her discussions with the authorities, they were very open to listening to her. She was promised all forms of support by the authorities. Mother argued valiantly for certain demands and eventually succeeded in having them addressed. One little finger. 50. Along with me, there were 3 other students from the Center for Special Education who had taken the School Leave ING exam, or the Secondary School Certificate, SSC, which is recognized by the Maharashtra State Board. I had completed the GCSE at Delaru, which was considered an equivalent. The 4 of us, Bharat Shah, Farhan Contractor, Andrea Rowe, and I, were the Phi RST students with multiple disabilities to enroll at a mainstream college in India. We created history by making the concept of inclusive education in higher education a real ITY in India for the Phi RST time. St. Xavier's College was founded in 1869 by German Jesuits and was named after the Roman Catholic missionary St. Francis Xavier. It was situated right in the center of the city of Bombay, close to the Victoria terminus. As one entered, there was a porch and a small decorative garden, leading to a reception where students or staff could get information and make phone calls. One then approached the Phi RST quadrangle, popularly known as the Phi RST quad, where students would sit under the arches and while away the hours. The auditorium divided the Phi RST quad from the second. One could sit in the second quad, but as it was close to the canteen, it got very noisy and was not as comfortable. The canteen was the nerve center, the hub of the college. Throngs of students congregated at the canteen at various points of the day. Beyond the canteen were some trees and a hostel for boys, next to which was the residence for the priests. The main building of the college comprised of 4 FL-ORs. The Phi RST FL-OR housed the OFFICE and one of the libraries. The second and the third FL-OR were mainly lecture halls. The 4th FL-OR consisted of the living quarters of some of the priests. Why do you want to do the BA? 51. There were 2 lifts. One lift was built in the last century. It had a key which, besides me, only the fathers kept. I was privileged enough to be given a key enabling me to operate the lift. It was small and my electric wheelchair could just about fit in, but with a great deal of pushing, pulling, and adjusting, I would squeeze in. The second lift was at the far end and was a bit bigger. Neither of the 2 lifts stopped on the mezzanine FL-OR, where the library was situated. This later proved to put me at a great disadvantage. I could never spend much time in the library. The lifts being old, I was dependent on them more than I desired. A question that I am often asked by journalists is whether I felt as if I was different. I most certainly did. I think it was in Xavier's where the differences hit me. It was my Phi RST day at Xavier's, and I did not know how ReadUpHeres were going to react to my disability. I entered the classroom. There was a stunned silence. The silence was interrupted by the irritating, incessant noise of the motor of my electric wheelchair. There were whispers and unsure shuffle es. The professor himself looked most scared and apprehensive. They must have wondered who this heap of undulating mass in an electric wheelchair was. Had she entered the wrong class? I parked myself in the front row. The class began. At least the entrance was over with. Your names please, said the professor, turning to the person next to me. Malini Chib, I said my name, which I know sounded completely garbled to all around me. No one understood. The professor looked perplexed. He asked again. I spoke again. He thought I had not understood the question. He was irritated. One little finger. 52. So were 88 other students. I tried spelling my name. He did not get me. I began to panic. I tried again. My speech was getting worse and worse. He looked away impatiently. He had not understood. I heard a cry from a student from behind. She said, Malini. Eureka. She had understood at last. I had held up the class for 15 minutes. The professor smiled reluctantly, but I did not care. At least I had overcome the Phi RST hurdle. Now, 88 of my classmates knew my name. They also knew that I had a speech problem. Although it was awful to have all those piercing eyes staring at me, I was happier than before I came in. Now I had some identity. I was not just a lump of flesh on a wheelchair. This exercise was repeated 5 times during the day as each lecturer wanted to know the names of their students. By the 3rd lecture, some of the students had befriended me, and they said my name for me, which I liked because it was quick and not so embarrassing. My name pronounced and spoken prop. Early sounded much nicer than my own speech, which tends to be a kind of a monotone. Another hurdle was that both my tools of communication, namely, my speech and hand function, were damaged. I could not write with a pencil and could not take down notes. I mostly used a typewriter, as in those days computers were rare. Mother came up with a new method. She gave my classmates a pad with a sheet of carbon paper. This way the lectures could be covered and I would be given a copy. I depended on them for my notes, which were important as the textbooks did not go into too much detail. My classmates seemed to like doing the task for me. For answering questions in class, I used a Canon communicator. Why do you want to do the BA? 53. To my surprise, often the students were not bothered with what the lecturer had to say, as they were busy mindlessly chat-tearing amongst themselves. I could not participate with them as my speech was not loud enough, and no one understood me clearly. I used to type what I wanted to say on the Canon. My speech was slow and laborious, yet what could I do? I had so much to say, but I could not contribute quickly. I felt left out, isolated and frustrated at not being able to participate and contribute to conversations fast, like my normal peers. Previously, I was in special schools, where life was at a slower pace. Professionals and others were trained to listen to all of us sympathetically, and they would give that extra time we needed to get across what we wanted to say. Break time for me was not a normal event. It was a huge obstacle, as far as accessibility was concerned. I had to be physically helped. I was taken by a few girlfriends to one of the lifts. We had to barge into classroom after classroom as the lift was at the other end of the corridor which ran through all the classrooms. Although I used an electric wheelchair, I needed help as there were ledges at the end of each classroom acting as barriers curtailing my independence. I was different and obviously I needed help with these barriers. What an absurd architect. Why do all normal people think that everyone in the world must keep to the norm of the walking pattern, and if one does not walk like everyone else, one will be left out of life? As I passed each classroom, the lecturer would stop speaking, and the whole class attention would turn towards me, until I passed through. It was terribly painful being the cynosure of all watchful eyes, and those few minutes always seemed like an agony. One little finger. 54. Owing to extreme problems of physical accessibility, and due to my limitations with quick speech, I could foresee that I was going to have problems. The most important activity in college was socializing. It was the RST time. I had mingled with people my own age. Would people understand me? Would they feel embarrassed talking to me? Were they coming up to me just because I was disabled? For the RST few weeks I zoomed around saying hello to a couple of people whom I knew. Generally, however, I moved about on my own as I felt shy to initiate a conversation. Although I had friends who were normal, I used to always meet them individually. I soon found out, painfully, that my vocal expression was not quick enough to be included in a dynamic interactive group situation. This was another agonizing experience. No effort was made by those who could speak. My speech became my biggest barrier. Again the same formula dominated. All these normal people, anybody not speaking like everyone else would literally be rejected and abandoned. It took me a long time to come to terms with it. I began questioning myself. Did I have my own personality? Was I just another disabled girl who needed things done for her? I knew that I was different and trapped in a dysfunctional body, but did others realize I had a spirit and a mind separate from this body? My body did not work like others, but did they realize that my mind was normal? Did they consider thinking that my desires were just the same as theirs? Socially, therefore, life was hard. I was coming from a background of having studied at a special school in England. All the others had already met up with their peers. A majority of students were from various schools in Bombay, so most had some friends and belonged to some group or gang. Why do you want to do the BA? 55. I began to feel that just like my dysfunctional body, my mind was also dysfunctional. I could also never think like them. I began doubting myself and my abilities. It was not a good beginning, but I eventually realized that I must be determined to fight GHT. I would show them that, except for my body, I was just like them. I was not going to give up. Let's go to a movie, said Feroza, a girl from my class. I had just joined them after my wanderings. Yes, which one? Kashid asked. Why not Kramer versus Kramer, or an OFFI Sare, and a gentleman, suggested Pervez. Yes, why not? It's 12 o'clock, and if we hurry, we can make it for the 1 o'clock show, said Kashid. The gang was informed. I was automatically left out. All I had to do was to tell them how to handle me, but I was not fast enough or pushy enough, and everything was organized very quickly. I obviously was going to be a problem for them, so it was just easier to leave me out. They must have assumed that I have no feelings and thus. How could I feel left out? I went up to class feeling hurt. I wanted them to make that extra bit of effort, but they were not prepared to do so in what seemed to me a thoughtless, mindless pursuit of enjoyment. Nevertheless, one day I did make it to a movie with them because I was determined to invite myself, so I opened the subject and asked my gang of friends if we could go for a movie. I wanted to show them that I too could go to the cinema. Yes, why not, they said a little doubtfully. I can walk if two people hold me on either side, under the arm, I suggested enthusiastically. They were caught up with the enthusiasm of the novelty of it and agreed. We'll take my car, I said. We went and saw the champ and I managed to walk up the stairs of the new Excelsior with their help. After the movie, we stuffed ourselves. One little finger. 56. With Bell and Pani Puri at Bethel's. It had been a success. The group had enjoyed my company, and they had not felt that I was a burden on them. It was the Phi RST of many outings. Though I generally had to be the Phi RST one to initiate and organize these, my friends usually complied readily. However, the process of normalization proved to be hard because I wanted to be a part of everything around me and often could not be. Dances, picnics, parties, I could not be a part of the normal mainstream of life because of my severe disabilities. It is then that I began my journey of deep introspection. What is normal? Who is normal? Why am I abnormal? Who decides? I cannot speak, I cannot walk, does that make me abnormal? It seemed obvious that I was different. I began to be painfully aware that I was never going to be easily accepted by so-called normal society. Academically, I am happy to recollect, I was treated equally with others. My Phi RST set of exam results were a dismal failure. I have got your unit test papers back, said our English teacher. I thought I had done fairly well, but I was mistaken. The papers came rolling in one by one. My marks were abysmally low. I had failed the Phi RST unit test. I had performed badly in all my 6 papers. I felt terrible, defeated and embarrassed, as just when I had made some friends and thought that I had communicated to them that I was intelligent, they saw my results. I was fully ashamed and felt very small and inadequate. Mother came to my rescue. She analyzed it all for me and said that it was not because I was not intelligent, but because I was not used to the rote kind of learning which was the practice in India. For 2 years in England, I was trained to. Why do you want to do the BA? 57. Conceptualize what I learned, but here I had to produce and swerve straight from the book. My mother, as usual, took up the cudgels and took charge of my education. She diligently tutored me for the next 5 VE years. I learned that the examiners wanted narrative and essay type of answers. They preferred quantity rather than quality. I gave short multiple choice answers because I had been taught that at Thomas DeLaRue. Many a time, I would not succeed in remembering words exactly as they were in the textbook. Also, long answers needed a great deal of effort. It was a hard task to master, especially since I had poor speech and poor hands. Our sessions would often end in tears. Why can't you understand that what you have told me about the French Revolution is all in your own words, Mother scolded. The examiners don't want that. Your English may be perfect, but it won't do for the exam. You have to use the words of the book. Please mug the words up, she said as she handed me the book. She brought me model answers which I chose to reject because I did not like the English. There was a lot to remember. I was given double the time, which was 4 hours. I had a lot to say and wondered if my writer would understand everything I said in what seemed a short span of 4 hours. I had to be tutored in economics and French. The HSC, Higher Secondary Certified Kate, required the study of a long gauge, the 2 options available being advanced Hindi and basic French. My Hindi was dreadful. I was just about able to communicate with the people who were helping us. I was lucky that Xavier's was offering French as I had not done Hindi, have ing completed my O levels in England. One little finger. 58. I made 2 close friends in class, namely, Christine and Fair Oza. Christine was short, dark and a staunch Catholic. She had long, jet black hair which she usually tied into a bun. Feroza was fair, tall and a Parsi. Christine, Feroza and I always sat at the back, discussing the most important part of our lives, our social lives. Studies were the least of our worries. Our chatter usually consisted of when the next party was, or what happened at our last party, or who said what to whom. I loved these conversations as it would make me feel normal. Malini, please be quiet, instructed my economics lecturer. New lecturers did not initially notice the difference in me from the rest of the class, as I had migrated to the back benches. Once they knew that I was disabled, they would come and ask whether I had any difficulty in understanding, and said to come to them if I needed any help. It was my 2nd year. I had passed the Phi RST year. I was trying very hard to whisper some thing to Christine. I had by then gotten accustomed to the behavior of other students, and used to sit at the back, blabbering away to friends. The economics lecturer knew my speech well as she was giving me extra help. There were advantages and disadvantages in getting extra help from lecturers. Another part of college life was boyfriends. There was much time to mingle with boys as classes finished by 3 in the afternoon. We were a part of a big gang. We all attended the same parties. Feroza was highly popular with the opposite sex. Varun Buttra, who was a friend of ours, took a liking to her. He was one of the Phi RST few men who actually talked to me. Are you ready? Said Feroza. She had come to pick me up, as we were going to yet another party. She had brought a guy from. Why do you want to do the BA? 59. The Doon School. He was cute looking, and we nicknamed him Dodo. What do you think of him? Feroza asked me. He's cute, I said. That was a mistake because she went and told the rest of the group and tried to pair us off as she thought that I needed a boyfriend. This did not materialize, but we remained good friends. Mayo, Varun and Rajdeep were the few men who took the trouble to get to know me and understand my speech. Most others looked at me as if I was still a child. It was a combination of their shyness as well as an unsurety about what to do and how to act. I think it also had to do with their macho image. For the typical boy, it was not acceptable to be seen with a disabled girlfriend. They wanted a normal girlfriend on their arm. Yet I loved the normalcy of life I had at Xavier's. It was a Black Monday when I got a call from Feroza. You are also on the blacklist, said Feroza, who sounded quite pleased on the phone. I don't believe it. You must be joking, I said. No, I am serious, and your percentage of attendance is lower than mine, said Feroza. Students at Xavier's needed 75% attendance. Else, they may not be promoted to the next class. How is that possible? I screeched. You were absent more often than me because of Mulhar, I said in a confident tone. Mulhar was a college festival that took place every year. All the colleges of Bombay participate in it. The festival usually lasts for 3 days. Games, quizzes, music contests and debates between colleges were organized. Feroza was selected as the SEC readeree of the organizing committee. So we expected her name to come out on the blacklist, but not mine. One little finger. 60. I normally attended the Phi RST 3 lectures, the Phi RST, beginning at 9 in the morning. I was very conscious of being on time, otherwise, I would interrupt the other classes. It was easier for Feroza as other students could proxy her name and roll number for her. For me it was impossible as I could not be missed by anyone. I stood out like a sore thumb. So, Miss Chib, you are on the blacklist at last, said Sagri and Shanaz as they sipped their tea. They were good friends who loved to tease me. We always knew you would be. Now, what do we have to do? I said woefully. We have to go to the principal's OFFICE and explain why our attendance is low, said Feroza. I went with Feroza. The vice principal looked stern and gave us a long speech about the consequences of missing lectures. If your attendance is below 75%, you will not be Alabama allowed to sit for the HSC, he said in his heavy South Indian accent. As he rattled on about the consequences, I transfi XED. My gaze to my navel as I found it difficult to control my laughter. I found his way of speaking very funny. He seemed quite assured that since I was looking down, I was very penitent. We solemnly signed a slip of paper and left. The tension of the previous 2 days disappeared. We were free to do whatever we liked, but we also knew that we had our responsibilities. After all, we were not in school anymore. Secretly, I felt normal. I too had been blacklisted like anyone else. All the best, I said to Feroza. It was the night before the HSC exam. We were all ringing up one another to extend good luck wishes. I had been given double the time. It was 2 hours for my friends but for 4. Why do you want to do the BA? 61. Me. I could type but my speed was acutely slow. For one case tie-in, the answer had to be 4 pages long, and if I were to type, one answer would take me 4 hours. I needed writers who could understand me and write quickly. People who write for others are known as amanuenses. There was a rule that the amanuenses had to be younger than the student, a rule which suited the visually impaired, but which was not conducive to the special needs of people like me who suffered from a speech problem. After much sustained negotiation with OFFICIALs of the Bombay University, Deepak Kulra, senior director of the Spastic Society of India, who pioneered training, and Pam managed to get me the provision of double the time, and allow the choice of amanuenses to be made by me. How was English? Suzanne, another friend who understood my speech very well, asked me. It was okay, except we were in a noisy room and people kept using it as a corridor. It was hard for Pam, who was writing for me, to hear what I was saying. But we did manage eventually to get a quiet room for ourselves in Elphinstone College, I said. Each paper was 4 hours long. This was just about bare able. The whole process was tedious as I had to regurgitate what I had learned for 4 hours at a stretch. Nikki, Sathi, Janyema and Versha all wrote for me. I had to be given some water and juice separately. It was also strenuous for those writing for me, in continuously trying to comprehend my monotonous, expressionless speech. I felt that I was just disgorging out the facts, rather than thinking and creating an answer. It has been said frequently, and I agree, that the education system in India teaches students to be like sausage machines rather than think heirs of the future. One little finger. 62. As I was isolated at another venue, and finished the exam much later than my peers, I missed meeting my friends after the exam to compare the answers. The day then arrived when the HSC results were put up on the board. Malini has got a Phi RST, exclaimed my very excited Aunt Junie Emma over the phone to mother. We were spending the summer in London. So darling, what subjects are you going to do in college for your BA? Janyema asked after I passed my HSC. She read the Xavier's prospectus and told me which subjects were compulsory. I vividly remember her sitting in our draw ing room sifting through the Xavier's prospectus, reading it out and discussing it with me. I recollected that when I was young, it was Janyema who was interested in and always encouraging my academic development. I was supremely happy. For the Phi RST time, I was on par with my peers academically. I had gotten admission into the degree program. For my BA, I had originally chosen all 6 papers in psychology, but the department, aware of my poor hand function, warned me that psychology demanded a great many experiments be performed. I changed to a double major in English and psychology, with history as an ancillary. Feroza was going to Sorbonne in Paris, as her mother had got a job with the French consulate. Christine too was not going to be in the same class, as she was doing different subjects. I had to make new friends all over again. It was not going to be easy. I was again left alone. It was as if I was thrown into the deep blue sea, and I could not swim to save my life. I would. Why do you want to do the BA? 63. Have to make that effort of proving that I was intelligent again. Fortunately, and surprisingly, it turned out to be easier than my Phi RST year at Xavier's. We have something in common, said Gita one day. I was on my own having a drink in the canteen. What is it? I said. Both our parents are divorced, said Gita, who was a par SI. Gita was short, fair, and was always dressed in trousers or shorts. Gita was in my English class. There were a couple of new students from Sophia College who seemed to be lost. The BA classes were different from HSC classes, as they were held on the third FLU where the lift could not reach. I was helped by my friends, and with two people holding me on either side, I could manage. The indignity of it, the visibility of my disability being pronounced glaringly, was very demeaning. We informed the lecturers and the management about the matter, and tried to make the classes shift to a FLU that was ACH's. Cybele by the lift, but they turned a deaf ear and told us that the lecturers themselves wanted their classes in certain rooms. The lecturers, in turn, placed the responsibility with the management. All this was highly complicated and eventually, we gave up, realizing that our efforts to shift the classroom were futile. There was obviously no proper policy. It was an act of favor and charity to have me there, and they were not going to adjust if it meant the slightest inconvenience. There is no point getting you down because in 35 minutes, we've got FC, said Gita. FC was the short form for Foundatine course that was compulsory in the FI-RST year of the BA program. It gave us FI-RST year students a basic though comprehensive picture of India's social, economic and political history. One little finger. 64. A few of us sat in the class and jabbered away the hour. With the use of my Canon communicator, I was able to make friends with a couple of girls from Sophia College. Carol, a girl who had also done O-levels like me, shared with me the difficulty in understanding the English used in the textbooks we were meant to study. The authors who wrote the textbooks used such poor language, which was simplistic and uninspiring. We had to try and make a conscious effort to use beginner's English in essays and exams, rather than engage with complex words and phrases. Another friend was Tina from Denmark. She had big, dark blue eyes which looked frightening, as she would gaze hard at anyone who would stare at us. This happened mostly when Elsa and I were struggling to fit my wheelchair into the narrow lift. Men would stand and stare at us, and it would drive us mad. They would never voluntarily come up and help. Oh no, why is this lift so damn small, and why do these chauvinist bastards persist on staring rather than helping? Elsa used swear words freely, and I quite liked to hear them, as it would somehow release all the venom in me. Indian male chauvinistic bastards. This was soon abbreviated to our secret code IMCB. So appropriate, I secretly thought. However, like most women my age, I love the company of men. I would try and seek them out and initiate a conversation, but unfortunately, the poor little bastards had never been taught to reach out beyond their own needs and so, they did not know what to do with me. Only a handful of men would make that extra bit of an effort to understand my atypical speech. But they never really went beyond superficial chatting. Why do you want to do the BA? 65. Social events continued to make me get into dregs of depression because I got the feeling that I was never really wanted. Two occasions remain in my mind. Prom night was one of them. Are you coming to prom night? Lila asked Tina. No, I have not been asked, said Tina. Neither have I, said Lila. Let's go in a big gang of girls. We went like bold women, fully confident that we were going to get partners. The boys were in their one and only formal suits. The girls wore long dresses or mini skirts. There was loud music playing in the background. We got a table and chatted amongst ourselves. We began dancing in a group. I danced with my crutches. After a little while one of the organizers came up and said rather patronizingly, "Why don't you sit down, you are bound to fall. You can't dance with crutches." Gita and Tina gave her a dirty look and were furious with her. Human beings were obviously averse to and not used to crutch dancing. I, like a fool, sat down promptly. Slowly my group of friends disintegrated and went to the dance FLU joining their men friends. The fun was over. I was no longer a part of them. I watched them dance and that terrible emotion, which I rarely allow to surface, began to assail me. I wondered if there would ever be a man in my life. Would a man see beyond my body? Would anyone put their arms around me and dance with me? Would anyone kiss me passionately? Would I ever be needed by a man emotionally, or would I always be regarded as a burden for someone to take care of? A silent tear unseen by any human I trickled down my face as Lionel Richie's "Hello" blared in the background. The dancers put their arms around each other and were lost in discovering each other's world. One little finger. 66. I was left alone with my thoughts. The realization that I would be disabled all my life dawned upon me. I had always imagined that when I grew up, I would be normal. Another occasion I remember was lunch at Narja's house. It was Narja's birthday. Her house was small but colorful. The curtains were bright pink and the sofas had FL oral furnishing. We met Narja's parents for the FI-RST time. They were elderly parses. Narja's mother wore a clean, crisp blue dress, which looked cool to the eye. "Lunch is served," said her mother. The table was FI-led with delicious dishes. There was the famous dansak, which was made with fardals, lentils. It could be eaten with rice or bread. A salad and 2 vegetables were served. Not to forget the mouth-watering Bombay duck, which is not a duck but a FI-SH, it is a Parsi specialty. I was rather oversensitive about my eating, as I would make a mess all around the side of the plate and my mouth would sometimes be covered with food. Therefore, I always preferred to sit and eat at the table. After serving me, Gita and Ellen joined the crowd with a plate full of food. The lunch was a buffet. "Sit here with Molly and have your lunch," said Narja's mother to Narjas. "No, I want to sit with my friends and eat," she replied, as if I was not there and could not hear or understand. I would have obviously liked to have eaten with them, but it was virtually impossible for me to hold a plate and eat while making polite conversation. I sat and ate in solitude as the others chatted away, quite unaware that I had not been able to join them. Why do you want to do the BA? 67. I felt terribly hurt. It was as if I had to be invited, and so for courtesy's sake I was. People did not really want my company. They were oblivious to my needs and could not see my physical difficulties with eating. It made me question what I wanted from these social gatherings. Why did I go? Was it the food or the company that I went for? It taught me to be a bit distant from my friends, as I seemed to collapse emotionally if they did something which upset me. My college years threw up new challenges on a variety of fronts, social, personal, and academic. I learned to grapple with these challenges and overcome obstacles thrown in my way. It was during these years that I lost someone who had played a very important part in my life, who had been the Phi RST to encourage me to enroll at college for a higher degree. For the 42 days that Janyema was sick and was admitted in the Breach Candy Hospital, we all practically lived in the hospital and only came home at night. All of us lived in our house. Nikki, Shonali, Taya, Shonali's sister and my cousin, and I slept on the drawing room FL while we left the beds for the grown-ups. Janyema was operated upon 4 times. By the 3rd week she went into a coma. We lost her on December 2nd. It was the most tragic blow that stunned and shocked the whole family. She was only 42. For me it was losing a friend, mentor and a second mother who had loved and supported me through all my trying times. I had to get used to life without Janyema, and one way of doing so was to immerse myself into college life and activities so as to temporarily distract myself and learn to move on with life. One little finger. 68. It was the 2nd year of the BA program. I had English, psychology and history. In history, we were studying modern India from the period of 1890 to 1960. I loved studying British India and the Indian independence struggle. In English, we were studying T.S. Eliot. There was also a paper in mass communication. In psychology, we were studying social psychology. Some of the topics that we covered were group behavior. What attracts people? What are the physiological and other factors that transpire when two people meet? What are the chemical reactions that take place between them? We had Maya Maida and Uma Pinto. Nikki told us Maya Maida was taking the class on murder in the cathedral and Uma Pinto would be teaching us poetry. In poetry we are studying Eliot's The Wasteland, said Nikki. Uma's Phi RST lecture left us baffled edition. She spoke in clipped English. Uma was tall and usually wore white. She would always treat us as some lesser mortals. We nicknamed her the White Witch because we took a strong disliking to her. She of course knew her work and was proficient in her subject. She spoke with a confident air in her voice. We were all petrified of the way she spoke. I said, I have never found anyone teaching English at Xavier's who speaks as well as Uma. Yes, I like her, but she is a bit uptight and pompous. Nikki said, speaking with an Oxonian accent and behaving in a highly superior manner. Why does she speak in such a condescending way, as if we were far below her station in life? Uma had a knack of pointing her finger at Nikki and asking for her opinion. We had to quietly put up with all her patronizing ways, as she was a well-known poet in the city. Why do you want to do the BA? 69. Uma handed our terminal exam papers back. We had all failed. You are all good for nothing, you will never get through the finals. You will never pass and you will be stuck here all your life because you don't read enough, she shrieked. I wonder if you use your gray cells at all, or for that matter if you even have any. Every time we came out we felt completely demoralized. We had to even tolerate her for mass communication. She used to insist that we saw the most depressing and macabre Phi LMS. She usually organized Russian Phi LMS at the Russian consulate for us. These Phi LMS were highly morbid and had Russian subtitles. All of you need to study more. You all have to put in at least 3 hours of reading, she said. Now if you only had done all your references and not wasted your time in silly college activities, then you might have passed. She went on to point out all our common mistakes. While she ranted and raved, I had an involuntary athetoid movement and one arm of my wheelchair FLEW open, which made a loud clutter and fell on the FLU with a big bang. Uma stopped talking for a minute to see what, or who, had caused the noise. All eyes turned towards me. I was deeply embarrassed. She realized what the matter was, ignored it and proceeded with her groaning, but she seemed to have lost the continuity and got very tired of us and dismissed the class early. Many came up to me after the class and congratulated me. The poem The Wasteland looked highly complicated and confusing. I did not know how I was going to master it. I was convinced that I was going to fail that year. You need to do a lot more reference work, Uma repeatedly said in every class. Her words kept echoing in my mind. One little finger. 70. How was I going to pass this year? I could not go to the library and spend hours like my friends, as the lift did not go there. I wished I could spend time studying and taking notes in the library without depending on anyone. Guess what? We have Zubin Petit instead of Maya Maida today for the English lecture, said Nikki. Who is he? I asked casually. He was a student last year at Xavier's, and he is the teacher's pet, said Nargis, the teacher being Uma. Oh my god. That's the bell. Let's go to the lift. What are you all doing? Hurry up, said Becky, as she rushed towards us. Where is the lecture? I asked. On the mezzanine FLUR. Oh hell, I said. We were late as usual. The lecture was to take place in a classroom on the 3rd FLUR. The lift only took us to the second FL. I thought to myself, why did Xavier's have to put all the lectures on the third FL when they know I have difficulty in walking? Xavier's was following a good policy in agreeing to admit disabled students, but facilities for accessibility were appalling. Anyway, it could not be helped, c'est la vie. I had no time to think negatively now. We entered late. Geeta and Carol were holding me under the arm on both sides. The class had already begun. I hated tearing late as I distracted the class. Zubin stopped speaking and waited until we sat down. It was highly embarrassing, and I wished he would carry on teaching. We were studying T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral. I looked at him closely and paid more attention to him than to Eliot. He was not bad looking, in fact he was dashing. Why do you want to do the BA? 71. He was tall, thin, wore spectacles, and had a distinguished Parsi accent. Although he seemed a bit nervous as this was his first day of teaching, he was better than Maya. He had a good command of the English language, and was fluent despite his Parsi accent. After the end of the lecture, he came towards me and offered to help take me down. From that day onwards, we would always meet at the bottom of the stairs 10 minutes before class was to begin. He would hold my one arm, I would hold the banister with the other hand, and we would go up together. I thought we managed well. I was bowled over. We managed well, and I liked him instantly. We were to become great friends. Meanwhile, I was still struggling with Uma's class. Uma gave all our examination papers back to us. We had all failed. We dismally walked down to the canteen. What shall we do? I kept asking Carol. I was definitely going to fail. Why not ask Zubin? Carol suggested. I was hesitant and embarrassed to ask. One day Uma had organized a screening of Hamlet at the Russian consulate and insisted that we all should attend it. The gang and Zubin piled into my car. Hamlet was dubbed in Russian, but there were English subtitles. I found it highly difficult to follow the movie, as the subtitles were zooming too fast for me to absorb. I turned to Zubin, who was sitting next to me, and he narrated the story to me in simple English. One day after the most intimidating lecture with Uma, I mustered up the courage and went up to Zubin. After exchanging the usual pleasantries, I asked him, "Can you help me?" One little finger. 72. What with? He said. I can't understand T.S. Eliot. It's all Greek to me, I said in my garbled way. Okay, he said, why not, I'll help you. Where shall we meet? Shall we meet at home? I said, we have more space. Sure. I gave him my address. We arranged a date to meet. Zubin started coming home. My mother and Zubin clicked immediately, as she herself had been a student of English. My understanding of Eliot evolved. I slowly began to fathom his material. Eliot propounded a great deal of philosophy, which I enjoyed talking about and discussing with Zubin. Zubin slowly began to understand my speech. By talking about Eliot, my ideas began to develop. I loved talking to Zubin about Eliot. Slowly, we weaved in my disability into the conversations, and started developing a philosophical discussion in regard to my disability. We had endless discussions on what was really therapy for me. I began to verbalize my pain of being and coping in a normal world. He had a loving tone, in which he would tackle all questions about my disability, and encourage me to talk about what was bothering me. I began to love the wasteland. We got to know each other through the poem. As we got more into it, we found that we had a great deal in common, and enjoyed each other's calm. Painy. Zubin became a part of the family. He used to spend hours talking to Mother. Mother gave him a part-time job at the society. Mother was always on the lookout for writers to write about the society. Zubin loved the work, and the people in the organization loved Zubin. Why do you want to do the BA? 73. We began being invited to the same parties, and ended up dancing together, as he was the only one from the opposite sex who could handle me extremely well. He understood my speech completely. I found him to be warm, compassionate, and caring. My affection for him grew deeper and deeper. I passed the second year, and was in my final year of the degree. I dropped English and psychology. I did 6 papers in his Tory, as I found remembering dates and events slightly easier. By the FTH year, I was a well-known figure at Xavier's. I left the group who stayed on to read 6 papers in English. I met up with 2 old friends from the 11th and 12th, Bhavna and Asha, who wrote my notes meticulously. They were thorough in their note-taking, which helped me immensely for when I was revising. We had a history teacher called Augusta Perrier who taught 3 papers on Europe, America, and Asia. It was a secret joke in the class that Augusta had a penchant for Napoleon. The other 3 papers on India began with the Indus civilization, moved through the various dynasties, like the Guptas, the Cholas, and India as it was before the Muslim invasion, a study of the art and architecture and the literature written at that time. We studied the various sects of Hinduism, how Jainism and Buddhism emerged out of Hinduism, and the 4 stages in a man's life according to the Hindu religion. One pauper was Mughal India, from the time that Babur won the Battle of Panipat to Aurangzeb's reign. My mother again tirelessly helped me by taking up my work and writing model answers, which I cheerfully and Anasham Edley mugged. I had 4 writers. Zubin was one of them. Miss Mudun, Varsha, and Mongala were the other writers. They patiently. One little finger. 74. Listened while I vocalized each word. The canon communicator would always be there, in case they did not understand the odd word. My writers had to understand ancient Indian Sanskrit words which sounded like tongue twisters, such as dasadhama, tirthankras and anupreksha. When the time came for negotiating the choice of writers and the amount of time I was to be given, there were again problems, as people knew little or nothing of my difficulties. People from the Spastic Society had to visit the university each day, teaching and familiarizing the staff about dealing with the differently abled. Without their help, I could not have made it. The BA exam was torturous. This time each paper was 6 hours long. It seemed as if it were interminable. 6 hours of continuous regurgitation. The worst thing was that the exam took place in the heat of May, when temperatures soared. My throat got so dry calling out long essay type of answers that I could not speak without sips of water. I called out each word laboriously, sometimes spelling it out. We would have a much-needed break for lunch. It needed a great deal of patience from the writer too, as they listened to my Dysart speech. The whole process was an arduous one for both the writer and me. We were both ready to be placed onto stretch airs at the end of each exam. This must have been what hard labor was like in one of Hitler's concentration camps. It was late July. The results were out. The Phi RSTFL was packed with students who were chattering away. Malini, you have passed, shrieked Bhavna. I had not done brilliantly, but I did not care. The important thing was that I had passed. Why do you want to do the BA? 75. Was it worth it? I often asked myself. Those physical barriers, the effort of going up those endless stairs with 2 people on either side, those piercing eyes, 100 of which would turn to you to stare, those laborious and endless exams going beyond the threshold of tolerance, was it worth it all? The agony of trying constantly to be understood, the desire to be perceived as normal, the embarrassment of being excluded. And the positive moments, the sheer joy of being included in the odd picnic, the lunch party, the cinema and even the blacklisting. Above all, the joy of making it through those terrible exams. Those great and glorious days combined with the pain of self-realization, the difficulty in grappling with reality, the endless questioning of whether the world is with me. Yes, it was worth it, every time, every moment. We all congratulated each other, and went down to the canteen to have our last cup of chai under the tree. As I moved in my wheelchair under the large peepal tree in the canteen, I had a sudden desire to cry. I realized that my Phi RST experience in the midst of normal people had been a success. I would rather work it out, confronting the situation, instead of being put away in a special school. I was Malini Chib, B.A. 76. Introduction to Port Wine. Goa with Nikki. Why don't you come along to Goa with me, suggested Nick one day. He was now in the United States, completing a liberal arts degree from the University of Rochester, or U of R, as they called it. As is common in America, it was a broad-based degree with many options available, including the option to spend a year studying abroad. He had selected the Institute of Human Potential in Vienna, where he was studying psychology and psychiatry. His friend Allison, who was studying at the Institute of European Studies, had come with him to India for a holiday. My eyes lit up on hearing his invitation. I hugged him and danced around with delight. To be in Goa would be wonderful, especially with my 22-year-old brother Nick. I take that means a yes, said Nick, who always spoke in a sardonic, humorous manner. Yes, I'd love to come. I said, but how you will manage the practicalities of both me and the wheelchair all by your self? I asked him. You know I can manage, Buck, I had given my wheelchair a name, better than anyone else, responded my brother. Also, Allison will help. I laughed happily and blew him a kiss. We left the next morning. Bombay Airport knew my needs well. With the help of the kind ladies from the facility counter. Introduction to Port Wine. 77. We sailed through the airport without difficulty. Goa was only 45 minutes away by air. It was the beginning of April and the summer was just weeks away. Although the days were hot, it was not sultry or unbearable. There was a constant cool breeze from the Arabian Sea, making it very Mediterranean-like and pleasant. We arrived at midday, only to be accosted by taxi drivers who, realizing we were tourists, were all too eager to make a quick rupee or two. Unlike other parts of India, the locals in Goa, if presented with the opportunity, are quick to take you for a ride, no matter what skin color you may be. My brother knew the system well and arranged something for us within seconds. Our destination was Baga Beach, North Goa. The journey to our hotel was picturesque, despite the uneven roads, which made me feel slightly carsick. The crops were a yellowish dusty color, and were waiting for the monsoons to change back to their natural luscious green. The road had been newly built. When we were children, we would often go to Goa by ferry, crossing the river Mandovi. My excitement to travel to Goa with Nick had not abated. Although we had grown up together, I was longing to discover the adult Nick. This was the Phi RST time Nick was alone with me, without the family. I also loved to be with my own generation, which is a rare occasion for me. I tend to spend more time with my parents' generation. We got to Baga around 2 p.m., and went straight to Erica's boutique, as we were staying with her. Erica and her sister Joanne had come to India from South Africa 20 years ago. They were friends of Kaka. They had completely imbibed the lifestyle of Goa, and had made themselves a part of the life in Baga. Both. One little finger. 78. Sisters were oversized but looked good in their exotic, loose westernized clothes, which they designed and which showed off their gorgeous tan. Although they were loud and highly EC-centric, they were warm. Allison, who was from Texas, was a typical American tourist. She wanted a quick whirlwind tour of Goa's churches and beaches with Nick alone, and did not quite understand the Indian way of family life where sisters are included. She was pleasant enough, but she would sulk if things did not go according to her wishes. She would wander off on her own as she was keen on sightseeing, whereas Nick and I had seen the sights of Goa on our previous visits and much preferred to laze around soaking up the sun. I hope you don't mind Allison, the loo is Indian style, said Erica casually. She probably thought that it was only Allison who would be affected, being a foreigner. My heart fell. I was not used to an Indian-style toilet. An Indian-style toilet needs quite some skill and maneuverability. One has to balance in a squatting position to spend a penny, which is all very well for the rest of humanity who possess good balance, but not an easy task for someone like me, who suffers from ataxia and has limited balance. I had been to Goa many times before, but this was the first time I had to experience this style of emptying one's bladder. You have used this kind of loo before, haven't you? Asked Erica. I nodded apprehensively. I was dying to talk to Nick so as to sort out the matter, but Erica was chattering with Allison, suggesting places that she should see. How are we going to manage? I thought to myself. Nick, who could see my anxiety, kept telling me in Bengali, our secret language, don't worry, we will discuss it later. Introduction to port wine. 79. I was not going to let the excitement of having Nick all to myself be dampened by a stupid method of ablution. We were surprised to discover that in the whole of Baga, there was only one public Western-style loo, and that too in a small little cafe on the beach, known as Anthony's. Anthony, the owner, had the key, so we had to go and ask for the key every time I wanted to use it. We had to leave Buck outside, as the loo was small, and had just enough space to fit Nick and me. Nick, being a frenetic for hygiene and cleanliness, decided to meticulously put toilet paper around the seat, as he was constantly afraid of catching a disease. He helped me on the seat, and stood patiently in the corner, until I finished my business. This was a daily ceremony, which he performed diligently. Nick's concern for me left a lump in my throat. Oh, it was fabulous to be in Goa. The smell of the sea air greeted us with open arms. It was so soothing and peaceful to be away from the hectic life that I had led in Bombay in the last few months. We shed our city clothes, slipped into our beach wear, and with our books in tow, headed towards Baga Beach. If one was observant, one could see nude hippies sunbathing. The beach looked ravishing. It was a landscape composed of white sand and clear blue water, with rustic boats scattered along Mo-net style, waiting to be taken out to fish by the locals. Being of a highly adventurous disposition, Nick was dying to spend a night with the locals and to go fishing with them at sunset. The best fish can only be caught at night. Every time the subject came up, I hoped that he was only kidding. Erica, aware of my trepidation, ensured that we were booked every evening, thank goodness. We had difficulty in getting the wheelchair down to the sea, as the sand can be a tedious surface to tread on, but Nick, one little finger, 80, managed it beautifully. He was familiar with maneuvering the wheelchair, and he knew how to handle it well on the rickety, uneven paths of Goa. Although Goa was not a very friendly place for my wheelchair, it did not deter us from taking it to the sea. Our days were relaxed as we spent most of the afternoon basking in the sun. I often thought of my stepmother Margot, who was quite enthusiastic about getting enough sun. Whenever she saw me, she would say, "Darling, you are so white, you need the sun. Why don't you come with me on Sunday morning to the club?" She would bask in the sun there, wearing a bikini. In my college days, my beauty sleep was a more important concern. I used to wake up at 7 a.m. on weekdays, so I would routinely decline her kind invitation, not wanting to sacrifice the luxury of waking up late. Margot and I had become very close, she was my good friend. She was obviously nothing like a traditional stepmother. I kept thinking about how lucky I was to have such an exceptional family. When the sun retired for the day, we went to Anthony's, a beach cafe that was the favorite amongst Nick and his crowd of friends. Anthony's was a barn-type restaurant. We began the evening with a round of drinks and starters consisting of prawns and mussels made in the Goan style. I could not believe that Goan port wine was sold for 9 rupees, so you can guess how many glasses I had. It was my first introduction to port wine, and I loved it. "You guys are late," cried Erica, one night, in her Anglo-Indian accent, as we strolled in lazily. Our bodies were covered with sand, and we were feeling dirty and grimy. "Please hurry up. My friend Christina is throwing a party for all of you." Introduction to port wine. 81. She said. We just about managed to have a decent wash in the cramped bathroom, and off we went to this party, which was full of people who were either high on drugs or booze. It was one of those palatial British Raj bungalows with a huge garden. Pockets of people were scattered over the lawns. I spent half of the evening counseling Allison, who, through the course of this trip, had come to see Nick in a new light. She remarked that Nick seemed like a stranger, but to me, he was behaving like his usual self. Perhaps he was not paying her enough attention. Nick had changed back to being his old self, and was mixing with all sorts of people. Although their relationship was platonic, it was obvious that she liked him. I think Allison was envisaging cozy romantic evenings and candlelit dinners with Nicky on the beaches of Goa. Instead, she found a mass of local people surrounding him, and gaping at him as if he was a Greek god. There was also his constant preoccupation with his disabled sister. I tried half-heartedly to get to know her, but I soon lost interest. At the party, I decided to investigate how much Goan wine I could drink. I knew that it was a worthless endeavor to prove my intelligence that evening, and I was happy to just sit and listen to people's chatter. I hadn't felt this relaxed in a long time. My glass was repeatedly led by Erica, who thought that I was cute because I was on a wheelchair. I laughed a great deal at her jokes. There were people who were affectionate, nurturing and patronizing because I was with Buck. Nick sat in the distance, giving me disapproving glances, which I chose to ignore. I was obviously getting slowly but surely inebriated. I only managed to drink half the bottle, and I was complete ly drunk. I opt onto Nick's shoulder in the car. Nick was one little finger. 82. Petrify Ed as he thought I was going to die. My head was spinning, and I thought this was the end. Nick helped me with my nightclothes and instructed me to have a glass of water, which was a mistake because I promptly vomited all over Nick and Buck. Meticulously, Nicky cleaned up the mess, and I vowed never to drink again. But that vow lasted only until sunset the next evening. I will always remember the beautiful, caring and relaxed holiday with my brother. 83. Entree-vous to adulthood. After my degree, I went to the United States for a short visit in 1988. It was a great learning experience for me. One of the places I visited was Berkeley. When visiting the university town of Berkeley, I was pleasantly surprised to find it teeming with electric wheelchairs. In fact, these wheelchairs were the order of the day. Wheelchairs had the right of way. The traffic came to a halt just to let them cross the road. The accessibility was splendid. All the pavements were ramped and the curbs rounded, making it a very disabled-friendly place. A wheelchair could hop on and off with ease. Every place was accessible, be it a library, museum, restaurant, shop, school, public toilet or theater, and this facilitated independence. In fact, the campus is located on a hill, and it is advisable for a disabled person to have an electric wheelchair. Besides mobility, it gives a disabled person a sense of freedom, making one forget that he or she can not walk. It was unbelievable for me, coming from a country where most buildings are totally inaccessible to wheelchairs. Often I have been upset while trying to enter 5-star hotels, art galleries, or parks in India, to find that no thought has been given to a person who cannot walk usually, all that is needed is a ramp. One little finger. 84. In Berkeley, there were several organizations dealing with disabled students, and guiding for the rights of disabled people. We visited the Center for Independent Living. At the center, they train disabled people on how to manage their lives, even if they suffer from severe disabilities. Disabled people had the help of many different attendants who aided them with daily living functions, keeping in mind their needs. Dad and I saw many disabled adults with multiple attendants who came and went. What I found hugely amazing was that disabled people themselves were in charge, and were placed in positions of power. They hired and read their personal helpers, who were called attendants. I saw many disabled people like me, or more severe than me, in positions of power, heading disability organizations. In Berkeley, disabled people prefer hiring outsiders and not their own family and friends to assist them, as this brings in a neutral person, and obfuscates some level of emotional attachment. Disabled people in Berkeley argue that all people are interdependent. They argue that nobody is completely independent. For instance, a normal person would need a carpenter, a plumber or an electrician perhaps. The disabled, too, are dependent on getting help to enable independent living, so that they can function more efficiently and are able to take up employment. Therefore, a personal attendant is really one's hands and legs in the form of another human being. The disabled person instructs his attendant about the ways and means he would like to be helped. He is taught how to train his or her own personal attendant to hire as well as to fire. To me, this form of independence is essential if I am to be allowed to contribute. Entree-vous to adulthood. 85. Positively to society, and not always be treated as a second-class citizen because I need help with my personal care. Again, this kind of philosophy was new to me. This concept appealed to me a great deal. Society always has these stereotypical concepts of disabled people, where they are portrayed as being extremely dependent and helpless. Why? Disabled people are human beings RST. But most people see the deformity and the disability before they notice any personal attributes. The person within the disabled person is always unnoticed because their physical demands are so immense and often glaring. I am sure most disabled people think so. The disabled person requires so much help that often the career gets burnt out. Over the years, I have learned that a disabled person must depend on many people for her/him to lead a so-called normal life. It was after my trip to Berkeley that we decided to get an attendant. Mother was in Calcutta at the time. She interviewed a Nepalese woman who spoke English. Maya was pleasant and in her mid-40s. Her last employers were one of the elite families of Calcutta. Maya arrived a month later. She had a pleasant disposition. Actually, she was a great help to my mother and Pam. For the RST time and years, we had a maid for our clothes. Maya came and helped me with my daily living needs. In Berkeley, disabled people called an aide a personal attendant. I was 22 and could no longer be dependent on mother for my physical care. Maya was a new addition to my new life. My trip to the US was an eye-opener for me. I had never seen so many disabled adults in my life, each leading an independent life. In Bombay when I was growing up, I rarely saw a disabled adult. So one little finger. 86. Invariably grew up thinking that I would be normal once I was an adult. My mother would always ask, when are you going to be independent? When I grow up, I would say. And that is when. Please tell me, said mother. You are already 21. Today, when I reflect on the past, I realized that my growing up started when I left home and went to Oxford. It was after our trip to Berkeley, when we had stopped over in London prior to returning to Bombay, that one day, Dad asked casually, Malls, shall we go to Oxford Polytechnic? He rang up Oxford Polytechnic and spoke to the dean, who gave us a time to meet with him. We hired a Hertz and drove down to Oxford, which was an hour's drive. The polytechnics of Britain offer a technical training, which the universities did not offer. It was only recently that the polytechnics were formally recognized as universities. I felt that I needed a more practical training to get a job. With my poor speech, I thought that formal training would give me an edge over others. Oxford Polytechnic had a good course in Publish ing. I decided to apply with Dad's help. I put in the application and was called for the interview. The interview was most informal. The dean wore a white checked crumpled shirt. It was like an informal chat. When I returned to Bombay, I did not give it a single thought. I immersed myself in the work of the Spastic Society. I decided to set up an informal recreational club called Adapt, able disabled all people together, where people could meet socially, as I felt that there was not much interaction between. Entrevue to adulthood. 87. Non-disabled and disabled people. My friend, Zubin, and I thought up the name Adapt at the same time, which was coincidental. Adapt met every 2 weeks just as a social forum. Zubin and I spent hours together, talking and getting to know each other. I would like to go to England to study Chaucer, said Zubin. Why don't you apply to Oxford and try for a scholarship? It's not easy, Malls. Come on, why don't you apply and give it a shot? I said. Okay, I will think about it, said Zubin. He applied and got an interview. Mesho, my uncle, was on the board of the INLAC scholarship. However, Zubin was indeed a brilliant scholar and certainly did not need anyone to pull any strings for him. Malls, I got it. Zubin exclaimed as he gave me a hug. Congrats, I said. It was a mixture of joy and sadness. My best friend would be leaving Bombay, and yet I felt happy that he had got into Oxford. Zubin left for Oxford. I felt sad at seeing him go. I buried myself in the work of the research department of the Spastic Society. One morning out of the blue, a letter arrived. The heading on the envelope was marked Oxford Polytechnic. Mother opened the letter. The letter said, Dear Ms. Chib, I hereby inform you that you have been accepted in the publishing course. On reading the letter, I shrieked with joy. One little finger. 88. Mother hugged me and said, You must get a scholarship, otherwise you will not be able to go. Mother always tried to make me see the reality. I crossed my fingers, hoping to get the money. I was slowly entering adulthood. I counted the days when I would be in Oxford. I was not sure whether I was looking forward to being at Oxford or being with Zubin. 89. Oxford, a love affair. Oxford is famous for its beauty, atmosphere, and of course, the knowledge and learning it imparts. It is unlike any other city in the world. Its uniqueness lies in its mellow beauty and architectural elegance, crowned by the glory of the ancient colleges. The ambience of Oxford, I decided, was infectious for students. You get hooked onto the city. With a family legacy comprising of an education in the Oxbridge tradition, I was keen to spend some time there, and I was pleased when I got admitted into the Oxford Polytechnic, which is now known as Brookes University. I might not have been in one of the famous ancient colleges, but I was in Oxford. As soon as I arrived in Oxford, I met with Zubin. It was lovely to see him, and I felt instantly comfortable as he greeted me with special warmth and affection. My initiation to Oxford began with Zubin, and I taking long walks, with him serving as a tour guide of sorts, showing me around. Zubin told me about the town and gown concept. The town and gown are two distinct communities of the university town, where town refers to the non-academic population and gown refers to the university community, especially the in science seats of learning that were in essence what Oxford and Cambridge stood for. One little finger. 90. I will take you to the University of Oxford Botanic Garden, said Zubin one day. The Oxford Botanic Garden is a scientific sea garden. It is one of the oldest botanic gardens in the world and the oldest in Great Britain. The garden was established in 1621 and contains specialist plant collections, with many plants suited to medical research. It is a lush space full of greenery and spread out over 4 acres, situated in the city centre. I loved the Botanic Garden. We walked through the walled garden admiring the 17th century stonework, stopping to look at the garden's oldest tree, an English yew. The garden was dotted with glass houses, the presence of which makes possible the cultivation of plants not naturally suited to England's harsh and extreme weather conditions. I could see a lot of tropical plants like the ones we see in India. The British have carefully brought and grown them here. Malls, the collection of plants which are grown here are not only for aesthetic reasons. Many gardeners come here to seek inspiration. In the beds and borders you may discover new species of plants that would be perfect in your garden at home, and partly for this reason, they strive to clearly label every plant in the garden, said Zubin as we walked around the ravishing gardens. Zubin was always perfectly comfortable with me. It is because he understood my speech completely, and was one of those few human beings who did not need another person to escort me when we spent time together. He could wheel me around everywhere. Some people preferred the assistance of an interpreter or someone to manage the wheelchair, but Zubin managed me and the wheelchair entirely on his own. Oxford, a love affair. 91. Secretly, I always hoped for a relationship wherein Zubin and I could be more than just friends. He was kind, loving, patient and always there for his friends. About a month or 2 before I was to arrive in Oxford, Dad, with Zubin's help, had found a flat for me. It was a quaint, lovely, semi-detached 2-bedroom flat near the famous Oxford Shark. The Headington Shark, as it is called, is a sculpture depicting a shark embedded head-RST in the roof of a residential house. It was created by an architect called John Buckley, who owns this unique house adorned with a shark emerging through the roof. The shark was a controversial issue when it first appeared, as the residents of Headington wanted it to be pulled down. But later Buckley received an award and the shark has quickly become a tourist favorite. However, Mother was not too happy to leave me with the carer in this area. It is too isolating for Malini and Maya, said Mother to Dad. Let's look for something else. Dad went to see if he could find student accommodation where both Maya and I could live. Luckily, he found a student residence called Pollock House advertised on the Oxford Brooks bulletin board. You are lucky, sir, we have one disability-friendly room, said Helen Green, the accommodation officer. How wonderful. When could we have a look, asked Dad. I can show you at 6 p.m., said Helen. Fine. I will bring Molly, said Dad. We saw the house. It was a huge Victorian mansion. Pollock House is located in Pullens Lane in Headington, and is very close to Oxford Polytechnic. It is located at the top of Headington Hill. One little finger. 92. Originally named The Vineyard, the house was renamed Pollock House, once it was acquired by the United Oxford Hospitals in 1948. For a few years it served as a nurses' train school, after which it was converted into a night nurses' home. In 1976, Oxford Polytechnic bought the property and made it into a students' hostel, by renovating it into 10 to 12 student rooms. Maya and I were assigned a huge, spacious room overlook a beautiful, massive garden. There was ample space for 2 beds and both Maya and I had our privacy. There was a shared adapted toilet for disabled people at the end of the corridor. There was a common kitchen for all students, which became the hub of gossip and exchange in the evening when we cooked dinner together, sharing our food with each other. The view from my room was breathtaking. When we drew the curtains we could see a gigantic garden, which with its luscious green landscape was an exquisite feast for the eyes. The grounds of the garden were shared by the students of Oxford Polytechnic and Robert Maxwell, the well-known media baron. Of course, his side of the property was huge and beautifully laid out. The students were mature and friendly. Fortunately for me, Maya was fluent in English, which was very useful considering my impaired speech. Maya was extremely fond of certain soaps that were aired on TV. I must watch Neighbours, Maya said one evening. I want to know what is happening to Kylie. Due to her knowledge of English, Maya fit into student life at Pollock House well. Students would love to have a quick cup of tea with her, and soon she was the star of Pollock House, immensely liked by all. Oxford, a love affair. 93. We were never lonely in Pollock House. Maya, like me, had the great ability to make friends. We were frequently invited out. There would always be someone around to have a chat with. It is important when a carer and a disabled person live together that both of them have outlets of their own, otherwise the relationship can become strenuous and suffocating. Ever since I threw myself into the world of normal people, first at Xavier's and then at Oxford, I have not stopped think about my added disability of poor speech. Having had car airs not as proficient in English as Maya, I have realized one thing for certain. When a person with disability has the added handicap of poor speech, it is necessary for the attendant or friend with her to speak fluent English, especially if one is in England. However, being with Maya had its set of advantages and disadvantages. The problem with having a carer who is fluent as Maya was, is that it was easier for people to ignore me and address the carer instead. Most people are afraid of not understanding me, because they are afraid of the unknown. When accompanied by a carer, there is always the danger of being overlooked and passed over by the carer's propensity to make casual conversation. Trained carers do not allow themselves to take over. Maya was lovely. She never took over and was very careful to include me. We had a vast circle of friends. An old childhood friend called Navina was in Oxford. Ina had the gift of recounting stories in a humorous way. I marveled at her ability to transform painful elements of a story into an amusing account. There were 2 couples who were particularly friendly towards us, namely, Jabir and Ruxhana from Bangladesh, and Sue and Graham. They were always there to keep an eye on us. One little finger. 94. And provide any assistance if needed. There were other students like me who also had special needs. Peter was hemophilic, Graham had become disabled after a car accident, and Damien was on a wheelchair. Graham had been sent to university by his OFFICE. He said that he derived his strength from me as I was an inspiration. We had long talks about being disabled. During our conversations, I often realized that when it came to our attitude towards life, I seemed to be the stronger one. Perhaps I had been shielded from the harsh realities of life until now. Maya and I immediately warmed up to Jabir and Ruxana. Maya had an advantage in that, being from Darjeeling, she spoke fluent Bengali. Today you will eat with us because we have brought fresh Eilish, Hilsa, Phi Sh from Cali Road, said Jabir. Eilish is the queen of Bengali Phi Sh and extremely popular in Bengali cuisine. We would love to come, I said, as I had often had it at home and at my grandmother's place. Sue and Graham were also invited. The conversation at the dinner table was pleasant and full of revelry. Graham related his plans to solve the world's problems. Sue reminded me of Pam. She was really a lot of fun. Hi, said Sue. Hi, I love your skirt and jumper, I said. I brought it at the car boot sale for £2. How affordable. Maya and I would love to go there, I said. So the next weekend, Maya and I piled into their car. The car boot sale was a nifty idea. People brought their old unwanted clothes and knickknacks which they did not use and sold it at a low price. For students, the car boot sale was an excellent find. Oxford, a love affair. 95. My wardrobe expanded twice a month as I picked up trendy yet affordable items. It was a cold winter day when the bell at Pullock House rang. I hoped that other inmates of the house would answer it. No such luck. I went on my wheelchair and was delighted to see Uncle Yogesh and his son Vikram. That evening, Navina, Vikram and I went out together. What do you want to do after you finish your degree in Oxford? Navina asked Vikram. Navina and I had become great friends as our parents knew each other. We were sitting in the courtyard of one of the famous pubs which had tall weeping willow trees. Navina, I want to go into all the villages of India and educate the masses, said Vikram. How are you going to do that, we asked. Well, I am thinking of a plan. Once I have one I will let you know, he said. Please let us know when you start it, we would love to help, I said. Your ideas are so obscure. I do hope they become a reality. Then you can win a Padma Shri, joked Navina. Such conversations, led with big dreams and ambitious plans in a light-hearted setting, is what I loved about my life in Oxford. I readily settled into life at Oxford, learning to balance my classes and my social life. My publishing course was for a year. It was meant for professionals who were keen on working in the industry. The course taught us all aspects of publishing, including editorial process design and layout, copywriting material, using computer. One little finger. 96. Software, the financial aspects of publication, the intricacies of the production process and marketing. Again, like there had been at Xavier's, there were access problems. The publishing department was up one flight of stairs, so when I wanted to meet my tutors, I had to walk up with Maya and always prearrange these visits as the effort was only worth it if I was guaranteed a meeting. It was physically fatiguing and prevented me from using the department's facilities. I had two tutors, Kevlin Smith and Bob Woodings. Initially, they were both a bit apprehensive about how I would finish the course. My incomprehensible speech made them doubt my intelligence. Zubin and Navina were readily available for assistance during tutorials to help interpret my speech. I had a lot to learn because I had little exposure to the publishing world. There were 20 of us in class. My classmates were all working in different parts of the world and for many I was the first disabled person they had met. Looking back, my interaction with my classmates was more like integration, as although the students were friendly, I felt that they could have been more helpful. I had to repeatedly ask them for notes, which they were finicky about sharing. They much preferred to keep their notes to themselves. I missed my friends at Xavier's who were helpful and inclusive, and would always lend me their notes. Again, I had difficulties with access the library. The library was a bit of a trek away, and getting to it was a physically demanding task. The Polytechnic library had a disabled entrance, but disabled students had to alert the librarian when they were planning to come. Also, there was no orientation to familiarize us with the use of the library. Oxford, a love affair. 97. Dad and Zubin often helped me with my assignments as my written work was not technical enough. This can partly be attributed to the fact that I had attended a special school for 8 years, as I earlier have explained, because of which my writing was affected. I think one of the fundamental concerns for education for disabled people is the communication output. Special and inclusive educators should look at the child's communication needs as the primary concern. I managed to get by with their help. The last and NAL model of the course was desktop publish ing. We had to publish 2 books. I did Zubin's book, which was a book of poems titled Small Moves, and I put together one of my mother's short paper entitled The History of Special Education in India. As part of the course, all students were to have a mock interview for a job in a publishing house, and this was to count towards 30% of the grade. I was looking forward to it as I had never experienced a viva before. But as the days progressed, I heard rumors from others in the class that the 2 professors were very tough. Malini, everybody has to have a viva. How will you do it? We have to find a way, said Kevlin. I will get an interpreter, I said quickly. When one is disabled, one has to make it easier for themselves in the normal world. You cannot expect the world to do everything for you. The days passed by quickly. Before I knew it, the day for my interview had arrived. I was nervous as I was convinced that I did not know very much. I took Zubin along as my interpreter. The interview was tough as Kevlin and Bob grilled me. K's tie-in after question was red at me. I had to speak articulately. One little finger. 98. There was no beating around the bush. Every ounce of knowledge I had, I regurgitated. 45 minutes later Kevlin told me that I had got the job. I smiled. I wish it was for real, I joked. I did well and passed. I had come a full circle in 1 year. A year ago my professors knew nothing about me as a student with special needs, but after dealing with me for the year, they no longer thought my problems were insurmountable. So yes, there was good news. I was doing well in class, new friends and enjoying my time with old ones, Zubin especially. What happened next was something I least expected. Malls, I have to talk to you about something, Zubin said one evening. He sounded very solemn. We were taking one of our routine walks in the botanic gardens. What is it? I said anxiously. Malls, I am gay, he said. I could not quite understand. I love men sexually, Zubin explained. I have a partner from Belgium and his name is Bart. He is coming here in a few weeks and you must meet him. I know you both will like each other immensely. I did not show my emotions right away. Perhaps, I did not yet fully realize how badly this was going to impact me. When Zubin left me, I started crying. Why was I crying? Yes, I was deeply hurt. For days, I would go off on my own and have a silent weep. I must have silently desired a more aromantic relationship. I was 21 and wanted male attention. All my girlfriends had boyfriends, and I too wanted a boyfriend. Why could not I be in a relationship? What was so abnormal? Oxford, a love affair. 99. About me. I could not comprehend my emotions. I yearned for all that was normal despite my disabled body. What made things worse was that Zubin understood me perfectly. We had shared a great deal together, and had so much in common. I heard later from a common friend, Helen, that Zubin was also upset, and had admitted that if had he not been gay, he would have been with me. For me it was a devastating heartbreak. It was not to be. The realization saddened me. 3. A slice of freedom. 100.